Hello class, it's Professor Streeter. We're going to look at the week 4 slideshow in this video and begin thinking about the status of morality. That's our topic for this week. For the first 3 weeks, we looked at questions about the nature of happiness and the nature of well-being. Now we're shifting our focus to questions about the nature of morality. These two topics, or these two questions, are related to each other. And the essay topic that I've given you has asked you to look at the connection between the individual pursuit of well-being and the concern that we have for the interests of other people. The individual pursuit of well-being is the question of welfare, right? What we owe other people, or what our responsibilities are to other people, that's the question about morality. How are those two connected? But let's turn to the first slideshow. I'm going to put myself on the bottom of the screen and present the status of morality. What are we talking about when we talk about morality? The term for that is metaethics, right? Metaethical questions raise questions about the status of morality. What is it even about? What is the basis of it? So what is the basis of our moral judgments? That's a question we can ask. What is their foundation? We can ask about the foundation of a building, right? We can also ask about the foundation of morality. What are the basic principles on which it rests? When I make the judgment that murder is wrong, what is it that I'm saying about murder? What is it that I'm expressing? What is the basis of that judgment? What does it rest on? That's a metaethical question. Not so much what is the difference between right and wrong, but how do we know the difference between right and wrong? What is the basis for claims that we make about the difference between right and wrong? Okay, before we start doing ethics, in some sense, engaging in ethical reasoning and ethical argument, we can ask metaethical questions about how it's possible for us to even do that and what we're doing when we do that. That's our topic for this week. Well, for last week, but also moving forward. What explains the legitimacy of those judgments, right? What gives them their authority? So we can look at conventional law. When the state imposes a speed limit, we can ask, well, what is the legitimacy or the basis of the state's imposition of that speed limit? What gives them their authority? Well, that's a political question, right? We tend to think that a government gets its authority from the will of the people. So if we vote for those in office and they are representing us through a form of democratic, a democratic process, then that gives them their authority to impose restrictions on how fast we drive. We can complain, we can vote those people out of office, we can lobby for a change in the laws, right? But so long as those laws come about through a democratic process, they have a kind of authority over us. Okay, but morality is different. Right? Morality is not imposed upon us by a legislative body that we vote on through democratic processes, right? The rules of morality, or the laws of morality, have a different source, right? But so then why should I follow them, right? Right? Why should I obey the rules of morality? Right? That's the kind of question that we're asking here. And then third, what are moral judgments about? What are we even talking about when we say that something's wrong, right? The wrongness of murder, what does that refer to? So there's this is a spectrum, there's a range of views, and this is the topic that Schaefer-Landau brings out starting in chapter 19 of the Fundamentals of Ethics. He's looking at the spectrum, or the range of views that you could take on these questions. You could be an objectivist. You could say that morality is real, just as physics and biology, right, show us something about the nature of, physics shows us something about the nature of matter, biology shows us something about the nature of living things, morality tells us something true about the nature of human beings and the judgments that they make and the world that they live in, right? There's an objective truth, right? So there really is a difference between right and wrong, and we can discover that difference. Relativism is the view that morality is real, right? There's something that we're describing, but it's relative to a person or to a culture. right? So so going to the question about what moral judgments are about, right? The objectivist thinks that when I say murder is wrong, I'm talking about some property of the act. The wrongness is picking out some property of the act. Just like when I say the sky is blue, right? Blue is picking out some property of the sky, or something along these lines. Morality is real but relative. It says, like, I'm picking out some property, but it's relative to the person. It's relative to a culture. And the nihilist wants to say that there is no such thing as morality. When we're talking about morality, we're just using words that don't refer to anything in the world at all. It's a useful fiction, or maybe a useless fiction, maybe a fiction we need to overcome, right? There isn't really a difference between right and wrong. So if you take that view, the nihilist, then there is no basis for moral judgments, right? There is no foundation. If there is no such thing as morality, it has no foundation. And our judgments are not legitimate. They don't have any special authority over us. The relativist wants to say that moral judgments like murder is wrong does have authority over us, right? But only relative to the attitudes of a culture or the attitudes of a person, right? Insofar as I disapprove of it, that makes it wrong. Or insofar as my culture disapproves of it, that makes it wrong. And that gives the judgment that you shouldn't commit murder some authority over me. The objectivist wants to say that, it doesn't matter who you are or what culture you were raised in. There's something wrong with murder, even if you don't have a negative attitude toward it, and even if it's, not disapproved of in your culture. There's something wrong about it. So the claim that you shouldn't kill someone, right, has authority over you independently of your personal or cultural attitudes. Okay. So this is sort of where we are then in contrasting the objectivist and the nihilist. There are moral standards that apply to everyone, the objectivist wants to say. There are truths about what is right or wrong. And these are independent of what we happen to believe and desire from a particular perspective. Whereas the nihilist, the other end of the spectrum, wants to say there are no moral standards. Right? There are no truths about what is right or wrong. Morality is either a fiction, it's a story, a made-up story, or it's a pure expression of emotion. We're just expressing our emotions when we say that murder is wrong. It's like saying, blah, spinach is yucky. There's nothing more to it. Okay, so think about where you fall within that spectrum. Are you more on the objectivist side, or are you more on the nihilistic side? In the middle, we have relativism. Relativism is not a form of objectivism, but it's also not a form of nihilism, right? The relativist wants to say that there are moral standards, but they don't apply to everyone. Right? They only apply within a specific cultural context or within a specific personal context. Right? There are truths about right and wrong, but they're relative either to each person, right, or to each society. So it's wrong, let's say, to tell a lie. Right? From the relativist point of view, well, that depends on whose perspective we're talking about, right? Lying might be wrong for me, but not wrong for you. Or lying might be wrong within the context of my society, but not wrong within the context of your society. Right? And so there are truths, but they are relative to a particular person or society. So we would say that lying is wrong in this society. That's true. Or lying is wrong for this person. That's an example of a relative truth. Whereas, going back to the objectivist wants to say that lying is wrong, full stop, right, for everyone. And the nihilist wants to say that there's no such thing as right or wrong. So lying is not wrong for anyone in some sense, right? Of course, we can impose moral standards on ourselves, but those moral standards aren't based on anything, right? They're just based on relations of power, right? The people in power impose moral standards on everyone else, and that's what gives them authority, right? I'm in power, so I can tell you what to do. But that's not a form of real authority, the nihilist wants to say. No, there is no such thing as moral authority, according to the nihilist. Okay? Whereas the relativist wants to say that there is moral authority, but only within a cultural context. Their legitimacy, the legitimacy of moral laws or moral principles depends on what we happen to believe, what we happen to desire or value from a particular perspective. Okay? I don't want to run out of time here, so I'm just checking the time. So let's think about relativism. This is the focus that Schaefer-Landau has in chapter 19. He's focusing on different varieties of relativism. One is called subjectivism, and this is a very extreme form of ethical relativism, where an act is morally acceptable just because either I approve of it, or my commitments allow it. Whereas an action is wrong just because A, I disapprove of it, or B, my commitments forbid it. So, right, the pure subjectivist would say that what makes lying, or what makes truth-telling acceptable is, from an ethical standpoint, is that I approve of it, right? I say yay to telling the truth. And or that my commitments, like what I do in my life and other things that I avow, commit me to the value of truth-telling, right? So I'm committed, right? I avow friendship, right? And maybe I think, you can't really be friends with someone without telling the truth to them. So the way I value friendship commits me to telling the truth. And that's what explains why telling the truth is morally acceptable, because I approve of it or my commitments allow it. Similarly, right, lying is wrong just because I'm opposed to it, right? That's what explains why it's wrong for me, right? Or my commitments forbid it. So that's a very extreme form of relativism. The cultural relativist that's a more subtle view, where the act is morally acceptable not because I approve of it, but because it's allowed by the guiding ideals of the society in which it's performed. Or an act is immoral just because it's forbidden by those ideals. So this is the form of relativism that both Midgley, in her essay about the samurai, and Gensler in his short piece, I'm a Relativist, they're interested in thinking about this concept of cultural relativism, and whether it's a plausible view and whether we should accept cultural relativism. None of the philosophers we looked at embraces subjectivism. Subjectivism looks like the kind of rejection of any useful moral standards, right? If what is right for me can be wrong for you, right? What's the point of talking about right and wrong, right? So if it's true that lying is morally acceptable to me, but morally unacceptable to you, well, what would resolve that disagreement? Nothing, because the subjectivist is saying those are just two independent truths, right? It's true that lying is permitted for me, and it's also true that it's unacceptable for you, and so there's no way of resolving that conflict. Whereas the cultural relativist says that, look, within a particular culture there may be disagreements, right? And how do we settle those disagreements? We look to the guiding ideals of the society, right? So within this society, the guiding ideals don't permit murder, let's say. And so even if I think it's okay to murder, right, that doesn't show that it is okay, because within my society, right, it conflicts with the guiding ideals, right? But there might be conflicts between different cultures, and it might be hard to resolve those conflicts. That's the kind of point the relativist wants to make, the cultural relativist. All right, I'm going to pause here, and we'll shift to these examples in the next video, right? So these examples are meant to get you to think about, like, how much of a relativist are you? Or do you lean more toward an objectivist account of morality? Or are you more of a nihilist, okay? Where do you fall in the spectrum of metaethical views concerning these kinds of claims, these kinds of moral judgments? That's where we'll pick up in the next video. Okay, that's all.